Chapter 2 Adam Part 4 of the Legends of the Jews, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Legends of the Jews, Volume 1 by Rabbi Louis Ginzberg. The Punishment. As long as Adam stood naked, casting about for means of escape from his embarrassment, God did not appear unto him, for one should not, strive to see a man in the hour of his disgrace. He waited until Adam and Eve had covered themselves with fig leaves. But even before God spoke to him, Adam knew what was impending. He heard the angels announce, God betaketh himself unto those that dwell in paradise. He heard more too. He heard what the angels were saying to one another about his fall, and what they were saying to God. In astonishment, the angels exclaimed, What? He still walks about in paradise? He is not yet dead? Whereupon God, I said to him, In the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Now ye know not what manner of day I meant, one of my days of 1,000 years, or one of your days. I will give him one of my days. He shall have 930 years to live, and 70 to leave to his descendants. When Adam and Eve heard God approaching, they hid among the trees, which would not have been possible before the fall. Before he committed his trespass, Adam's height was from the heavens to the earth, but afterward it was reduced to 100 ells. Another consequence of his sin was the fear Adam felt when he heard the voice of God. Before his fall, it had not disquieted him in the least. Hence it was that when Adam said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid. God replied, Aforetime thou wert not afraid, and now thou art afraid? God refrained from reproaches at first. Standing at the gate of paradise, he but asked, Where art thou, Adam? Thus did God desire to teach man a rule of polite behavior, never to enter the house of another without announcing himself. It cannot be denied the words, Where art thou? Were pregnant with meaning. They were intended to bring home to Adam the vast difference between his latter and his former state, between his supernatural size then and his shrunken size now, between the lordship of God over him then and the lordship of the serpent over him now. At the same time, God wanted to give Adam the opportunity of repenting of his sin, and he would have received divine forgiveness for it. But so far from repenting of it, Adam slandered God and uttered blasphemies against him. When God asked him, Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee, thou shouldst not eat? He did not confess his sin, but excused himself with the words, quote, "O Lord of the world, as long as I was alone, I did not fall into sin, but as soon as this woman came to me, she tempted me." End quote. God replied, quote, "I gave her unto thee as a help, and thou art ungrateful when thou accusest her, saying, She gave me of the tree. Thou shouldst not have obeyed her, for thou art the head and not she." End quote. God, who knows all things, had foreseen exactly this, and he did not create Eve until Adam had asked him for a helpmate, so that he might not have apparently good reason for reproaching God with having created woman. As Adam tried to shift the blame for his misdeed from himself, so also Eve. She, like her husband, did not confess her transgression and pray for pardon, which would have been granted to her. Gracious as God is, he did not pronounce the doom upon Adam and Eve until they showed themselves stiff-necked. Not so with the serpent. God inflicted the curse upon the serpent without hearing his defense, for the serpent is a villain, and the wicked are good debaters. If God had questioned him, the serpent would have answered, quote, "Thou didst give them a command, and I did contradict it. Why did they obey me and not thee?" End quote. Therefore, God did not enter into an argument with the serpent, but straightway decreed the following 10 punishments. The mouth of the serpent was closed, and his power of speech taken away. His hands and feet were hacked off. The earth was given him as food. He must suffer great pain in sloughing his skin. Enmity is to exist between him and man. If he eats the choicest viands, or drinks the sweetest beverages, they all change into dust in his mouth. The pregnancy of the female serpent lasts 7 years. Men shall seek to kill him as soon as they catch sight of him. Even in the future world, where all beings will be blessed, he will not escape the punishment decreed for him. He will vanish from out of the Holy Land if Israel walks in the ways of God. Furthermore, God spake to the serpent, quote, "I created thee to be king over all animals, cattle, and the beasts of the field alike, but thou wast not satisfied. Therefore thou shalt be cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. I created thee of upright posture, but thou wast not satisfied. Therefore thou shalt go upon thy belly. I created thee to eat the same food as man, but thou wast not satisfied. Therefore thou shalt eat dust all the days of thy life. Thou didst seek to cause the death of Adam in order to espouse his wife. Therefore I will put enmity between thee and the woman." End quote. How true it is! He who lusts after what is not his due, not only does he not attain his desire, but he also loses what he has. The angels had been present when the doom was pronounced upon the serpent, for God had convoked a Sanhedrin of 71 angels when he sat in judgment upon him. So the execution of the decree against him was entrusted to the angels. They descended from heaven and chopped off his hands and feet. His suffering was so great that his agonized cries could be heard from one end of the world to the other. The verdict against Eve also consisted of 10 curses, the effect of which is noticeable to this day in the physical, spiritual, and social state of women. It was not God himself who announced her fate to Eve. The only woman with whom God ever spoke was Sarah. In the case of Eve, he made use of the services of an interpreter. Finally, also the punishment of Adam was tenfold. He lost his celestial clothing. God stripped it off him. In sorrow, he was to earn his daily bread. The food he ate was to be turned from good into bad. His children were to wander from land to land. His body was to exude sweat. He was to have an evil inclination. In death, his body was to be a prey of the worms. Animals were to have power over him, and that they could slay him. His days were to be few and full of trouble. In the end, he was to render account of all his doings on earth. These 3 sinners were not the only ones to have punishment dealt out to them. The earth fared no better, for it had been guilty of various misdemeanors. In the first place, it had not entirely heeded the command of God given on the 3rd day, to bring forth, quote, tree of fruit, end quote. What God had desired was a tree, the wood of which was to be as pleasant to the taste as the fruit thereof. The earth, however, produced a tree bearing fruit, the tree itself not being edible. Again, the earth did not do its whole duty in connection with the sin of Adam. God had appointed the sun and the earth witnesses to testify against Adam in case he committed a trespass. The sun, accordingly, had grown dark the instant Adam became guilty of disobedience, but the earth, not knowing how to take notice of Adam's fall, disregarded it altogether. The earth also had to suffer a tenfold punishment. Independent before, she was hereafter to wait to be watered by the rain from above. Sometimes the fruits of the earth fail. The grain she brings forth is stricken with blasting and mildew. She must produce all sorts of noxious vermin. Thenceforth, she was to be divided into valleys and mountains. She must grow barren trees, bearing no fruit. Thorns and thistles sprout from her. Much is sown in the earth, but little is harvested. In time to come, the earth will have to disclose her blood, and shall no more cover her slain, and finally she shall one day wax old like a garment. When Adam heard the words, quote, thorns and thistles shall it bring forth, end quote, concerning the ground, a sweat broke out of his face, and he said, quote, what, shall I and my cattle eat from the same manger? End quote. The Lord had mercy upon him and spoke, quote, in view of the sweat of thy face, thou shalt eat thy bread. End quote. The earth is not the only thing created that was made to suffer through the sin of Adam. The same fate overtook the moon when the serpent seduced Adam and Eve and exposed their nakedness, they wept bitterly, and with them wept the heavens, and the sun, and the stars, and all created beings and things up to the throne of God. The very angels and the celestial beings were grieved by the transgression of Adam. The moon alone laughed, wherefore God grew wroth, and obscured her light. Instead of shining steadily like the sun all the length of the day, she grows old quickly, and must be born and reborn again and again. The callous conduct of the moon offended God, not only by way of contrast with the compassion of all other creatures, but because he himself was full of pity for Adam and his wife. He made clothes for them out of the skin stripped from the serpent. He would have done more. He would have permitted them to remain in paradise if only they had been penitent. But they refused to repent, and they had to leave, lest their godlike understanding urge them to ravage the tree of life, and they learn to live forever. As it was when God dismissed them from paradise, he did not allow the divine quality of justice to prevail entirely. He associated mercy with it. As they left, he said, quote, "Oh, what a pity that Adam was not able to observe the command laid upon him for even a brief span of time." End quote. To guard the entrance of paradise, God appointed the cherubim, called also the ever-turning sword of flames, because angels can turn themselves from one shape into another at need. Instead of the tree of life, God gave Adam the Torah, which likewise is a tree of life to them that lay hold upon her, and he was permitted to take up his abode in the vicinity of paradise in the east. Sentence pronounced upon Adam and Eve and the serpent, the Lord commanded the angels to turn the man and the woman out of paradise. They began to weep and supplicate bitterly, and the angels took pity upon them and left the divine command unfulfilled, until they could petition God to mitigate his severe verdict. But the Lord was inexorable, saying, quote, "Was it I that committed a trespass, or did I pronounce a false judgment?" End quote. Also, Adam's prayer to be given of the fruit of the tree of life was turned aside, with the promise, however, that if he would lead a pious life, he would be given the fruit on the day of resurrection, and he would then live forever. Seeing that God had resolved unalterably, Adam began to weep again and implore the angels to grant him at least permission to take sweet-scented spices with him out of paradise, that outside too he might be able to bring offerings unto God, and his prayers be accepted before the Lord. Thereupon the angels came before God and spake, quote, "King unto everlasting, command thou us to give Adam sweet-scented spices of paradise." End quote. And God heard their prayer. Thus Adam gathered saffron, nard, calamus, and cinnamon, and all sorts of seeds besides for his sustenance. Laden with these, Adam and Eve left paradise and came upon earth. They had enjoyed the splendors of paradise but a brief span of time, but a few hours. It was in the first hour of the sixth day of creation that God conceived the idea of creating man. In the second hour he took counsel with the angels. In the third he gathered the dust for the body of man. In the fourth he formed Adam. In the fifth he clothed him with skin. In the sixth the soulless shape was complete, so that it could stand upright. In the seventh a soul was breathed into it. In the eighth man was led into paradise. In the ninth the divine command prohibiting the fruit of the tree in the midst of the garden was issued to him. In the 10th he transgressed the command. In the 11th he was judged, and in the 12th hour of the day he was cast out of paradise in atonement for his sin. This eventful day was the first of the month of Tishri. Therefore God spoke to Adam, quote, "Thou shalt be the prototype of thy children, and thou hast been judged by me on this day and absolved. So thy children Israel shall be judged by me on this New Year's day, and they shall be absolved." End quote. Each day of creation brought forth three things: the first, heaven, earth, and light; the second, the firmament, Gehenna, and the angels; the third, trees, herbs, and paradise; the fourth, sun, moon, and stars; and the fifth, fishes, birds, and Leviathan. As God intended to rest on the seventh day, the Sabbath, the sixth day had to do double duty. It brought forth six creations: Adam, Eve, cattle, reptiles, the beasts of the field, and demons. The demons were made shortly before the Sabbath came in, and they are, therefore, incorporeal spirits. The Lord had no time to create bodies for them. In the twilight, between the sixth day and the Sabbath, 10 creations were brought forth: the rainbow, invisible until Noah's time; the manna, water springs, whence Israel drew water for his thirst in the desert; the writing upon the 2 tables of stone gave at Sinai; the pen with which the writing was written; the 2 tables themselves; the mouth of Balaam's she-ass; the grave of Moses; the cave in which Moses and Elijah dwelt; and the rod of Aaron with its blossoms and its ripe almonds. End of chapter 2, part 4. Recording by Robert Scott, July the 28th, 2007.